Oh, welcome. Welcome to the TD Lecture 2023, The Power of Women in Philanthropy. I'm Susan Phillips, Professor and Supervisor of the Master of Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership at Carleton University, the only program of its kind in the country. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that our home institution, Carleton University, is situated on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. For those of you elsewhere, we encourage you to recognize the ancestral holders and the diverse Indigenous peoples of these lands. As settlers, immigrants, their descendants, and as visitors, we honor and respect the many Indigenous peoples of our land and hope for a more just future together. As we noted, we're recording the panel, not the audience, which will then later be available on both the MPNL and the Panel Perspectives website. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Lee Rose, Manager, Community Engagement, TD Bank Group, to provide a welcome from TD, which has hosted this annual lecture for over a decade now, and we greatly appreciate the support and partnership of TD in this endeavor. Lee, over to you.
Thanks so much, Susan. It's wonderful to be here today with everyone. As Susan just mentioned, TD's been a supporter of the Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership Program at Carleton University since its inception in 2012. And we're definitely proud to present today's lecture on the power of women in philanthropy. I have the great pleasure of holding what I think to be the best job at TD, leading community engagement for the bank across Ontario. Part of my job includes building and stewarding relationships with organizations and initiatives that are supported by the TD Ready commitment, which is our corporate citizenship platform, which aspires to help open doors to a more inclusive and sustainable tomorrow. Through that commitment, we're focusing on 4 drivers on what we at the bank believe, when acted on together, will have the greatest impact. And those drivers are financial security, a vibrant planet, connected communities, and better health. And a key component of that commitment is a target of $1 billion in community investments by 2030 across those 4 interconnected drivers. Now, to realize that ambition, we know that we can't act alone, and we need collaboration, ideas, and action from nonprofits, community-based organizations, and philanthropists. Which is why, if I'm being completely honest, it all feels a little surreal for me to be here today, sharing words of welcome as we kick off the lecture. You see, this coming February will mark my 3-year anniversary with the bank. And some of you may be surprised, and some of you who might be listening and I might know, will be less so surprised to learn that I'm not a career banker. I'm actually a former executive director. I've also been a program manager, a board chair, a volunteer coordinator. And I think, like many of us on the call today, I'm also a forever fundraiser. All of this experience built on a 15-plus-year career in the charitable and philanthropic sector. So as I reflect on my own positionality and the work that I get to do, whether that's at TD or over my time in the sector, it's all been driven by my personal and professional desire to help others make the world a better place. My understanding of philanthropy has also been deeply influenced by women in my life. I think of my grandmother, who welcomed anyone who was hungry to her kitchen table, was on all the church committees, and never missed a charity bingo at the community center. My former board chair, mentor, and friend, Tatiana Fraser, whose work in social impact is rooted in and guided by feminist practice and approaches. And my 14-year-old daughter, Michaela, who, despite already having experienced misogyny, sexism, and gender-based bias at such a young age, embodies a spirit of social justice, resilience, and agency that I admire. I'm grateful to these women and the countless others that have had and continue to have a profound impact on me, my work, and my life. So I guess that's why I'm particularly excited to be here today, to learn more about the power of women in philanthropy, those that are supporting grassroots initiatives, funding unpopular causes, and driving systemic change, from inspiring women like Susan, Joanne, Jeannie, and Lindsay. So on behalf of TD and me, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of today's lecture and to learn from all of you. Merci. Back to you, Susan.
Thank you, Lee. It's been such an honor to partner with TD over all these years with the MPNL. We're focusing on the power of women in philanthropy, but women have long been important contributors and drivers of philanthropy, both individually and in their households. But there's a general sense that the role of women is becoming more significant in philanthropy and that it's changing. Women have more independent sources of wealth, they're more involved in entrepreneurship, and their leadership roles in the private sector and in government and in the nonprofit sector in much greater numbers. There are accounts that women give differently than men for different reasons. They do greater due diligence in their giving and volunteering, and they often engage in multiple and overlapping ways. Our aim with the MPNL is to investigate trends with data and evidence, and on this basis, engage conversations that enhance professional practice and public policies. In this panel, we'll present some of that evidence with a new study by TD on women in philanthropy, by comparisons with the extensive research that's been done in the US, and consider lessons from personal and professional experience. It's my pleasure to introduce the panelists in the order in which they'll present. Jeannie Infante-Sager is director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University in Indianapolis. Jeannie has a master's in philanthropic studies from Indiana and is a seasoned nonprofit executive, having held leadership positions in US healthcare and higher education nonprofits, as well as a wide variety of board positions. For more than 3 decades, the Women's Institute has conducted research and provided training that, by understanding how gender shapes giving behavior, seeks to unlock the full potential of women in philanthropy. At the end of this session, I'm sure you will agree that Canada needs its own Women's Institute in philanthropy. Joanne Ryan needs no introduction to many of you, as she's been a leader and innovator in Canadian philanthropy for many years. As Vice President Philanthropic Advisory Services at TD Wealth, Joanne was the architect, the driver, and is the executive director of the Private Giving Foundation, which introduced donor-advised funds to the Canadian financial system as a way of expanding the choice of giving vehicles. Joanne's been a leader in advancing the philanthropic profession in Canada through CAGP, the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, and other organizations. She's helped a multitude of donors make more strategic choices in their philanthropy. Joanne led the first study on women in philanthropy in Canada in 2014, and the 2023 study that you will hear about in this session, and which, if you're registered, you will get a copy when it's released within the week. And I'm very proud that Joanne Ryan's been a member since our founding 10 years ago of the MPNL Advisory Council, providing invaluable strategic guidance to the program. We wanted to round out the panel by hearing from a philanthropist who thinks strategically about making philanthropy more impactful and is engaged in furthering the role of women in social change. Lindsay Sherman-Zuckerlin is that kind of change maker. After practicing family law and mediation for a decade, Lindsay co-founded the Happy Roots Foundation and is its co-chair, a foundation based here in Ottawa that focuses on infant and childhood mental health. She also co-founded So Real, a social enterprise that uses the power of travel to advance gender equality and reduce gender-based violence. Lindsay's also studied philanthropy through her MSc in nonprofit management at Columbia University and is a friend and supporter of the MPNL. The format is that each panelist will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes on the topic, then we'll have an engaged discussion and we'll open it to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box and one of our staff team will collate them, and then we'll address as many of them as we can. So Jeannie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much for the invitation to join Joanne and Lindsay today in this, what I'm sure is going to be a dynamic conversation. As Susan shared, and as most of my panelists, and as even Lee shared, I come to this work as a practitioner, and really excited to be able to lead our focus in terms of research to practice at the Women's Philanthropy Institute. For those of you who might not be as familiar with the Women's Philanthropy Institute, we are actually the only research institute in the world focused on gender and philanthropy. And we're located at the Indiana University School of Philanthropy. Our mission at the Women's Philanthropy Institute is to conduct, curate, and disseminate rigorous research that grows women's philanthropy. And what we know from nearly 2 decades of research is that gender matters. It should be no surprise. Identity plays a large role in how we approach all of the decisions that we make in our lives. And so philanthropy shouldn't be any different. We know from the research that women have incredible philanthropic power, but their giving is unique, and women donors must be better understood. And so why does the Women's Philanthropy Institute focus on women's philanthropy? Well, women's wealth and influence are growing. By most measures, today's demographic changes benefit women. More and more women have increased access to 3 key predictors of philanthropy. That's education, income, and wealth. At the same time, more women are the primary breadwinner in their families, and more women are financially independent. In fact, some reports suggest that 90% of women are the chief financial officers of their households. Women's wealth is rising. Women's share of wealth has risen considerably over the past 50 years, and today they hold around 40% of global wealth. And the Boston Consulting Group says that by 2025, women will have accumulated assets worth $110 trillion. And women are expected to inherit 70% of the wealth that will be passed down over the next 2 generations. And women tend to inherit twice, once from their parents and then from their spouse. And women, as Susan has shared, are also more likely to give with regards to across generations, races, and income levels. Women give more, and they give differently than their male counterparts. And as women's wealth grows, the more likely they will give to charitable organizations. How women think about wealth differs too. According to the Bank of America study on affluent donors, women are nearly twice as likely as men to say that giving to charity is actually the most satisfying aspect of having wealth. And unlocking the full potential of women's philanthropy requires understanding how gender shapes giving behavior. So the reports that we have at WPI span a range of topics, from retirement to giving circles to impact investing to the transmission of generosity. And across these topics, we apply a gender lens to better understand where, how, and why women and men give differently. Our research has shown that in terms of who gives, again, across race, ethnicity, and income levels, single women are more likely to give than single men. And when looking across generations, younger women influence household charitable decisions more than their older counterparts. Around retirement, we found that single women and married couples are more likely to give and give more than single men, and they also volunteer more than single men. And we're often asked about marriage. Marriage affects giving in positive ways. We know that being married increases both the likelihood and the amount of giving. Married and cohabitating couples tend to give more to charity than single men or single women. And while most couples make giving decisions jointly, that's 6 out of 10 households, women are more likely than men to be the sole decider in a household. Much of our research around women as donors can be categorized under 3 themes. Women give broadly, women give collectively, and women give holistically. So under broadly, women are drawn to a more expanded definition of philanthropy. And in our Women Give 2019 report, we encourage women from all backgrounds to fully understand that diverse acts of generosity are represented in philanthropy. Research shows that women tend to give more than money. They're using their time, their expertise, their advocacy, and their own networks to apply all of their resources to work for good. We know that women like to give together. A study that we did about giving behavior on Giving Tuesday found that women are more likely than men to give on a special designated giving day. And with the exponential growth of giving circles over the past 10 years, women continue to comprise the majority of collective giving network members. About 70% of all giving circles report that women make up more than half their membership. When we look at why do men and women give, we find this holistic nature with regards to giving. And we look at how these motivations influence their giving. So when asked, women say that empathy motivates their giving. For men, giving is often more about self-interest. This is a matter of degree and priority. It's not that men are not empathetic, but we believe that because women are socialized into more helping, nurturing, and caring roles from an early age, these behaviors become ingrained and become the basis for many of their actions, including philanthropy. But empathy also drives women's deep engagement with nonprofits. Research has shown that women are more likely to give to organizations where they have a personal connection or an alignment with political or philosophical beliefs. Single women are more likely than single men to cite being on a board or volunteering for an organization as motivations for their giving. And in general, women are less motivated than men by tax advantages and public recognition. They are highly motivated by connections to and volunteering for the causes that they care about. So the gifts of time and talent and testimony and ties are very important to a woman's gift of treasure. And a study that we did with high net wealth women found that they are known to approach giving in strategic and holistic ways. This study revealed that these women donors connect wealth with responsibility. They seek to educate themselves before making funding decisions. They are willing to take risks with their philanthropy. They value return on investment, and they prefer investing in organizations and programs that are focused on systemic change. They also see philanthropy as a fully integrated aspect of their lives, and they identified as activist donors. And given this holistic approach, it's no surprise that women are more likely to give to women and girls' causes. And our research around giving to these causes has room to grow. We developed the Women and Girls Index to measure giving to organizations that primarily serve women and girls here in the United States, and have consistently found that less than 2% of charitable giving goes to these organizations. So demographics are shifting dramatically, and philanthropy is becoming ever more elastic. 15 years ago, researchers were just beginning to consider gender as a factor in charitable giving. But now we have far more data points than I can share with you in just these few minutes. So I encourage you to visit our website to learn more. All of our reports can be found in full, online and open and free, along with infographics and executive summaries that can help translate that research to practice. And we're grateful to have had funders and donors who are interested in understanding gender and philanthropy and investing in quantitative and qualitative research to help us better understand how identity shapes giving behavior and how we can better meet donors where they are and unlock more giving. Women's philanthropy has long been the backbone of civic engagement, and it continues to evolve. And today, women contribute their time, their talent, their treasure, and their testimony in innovative, creative, and trailblazing ways. And more women among us are thinking about philanthropy and harnessing this power to do good, which is why I'm very excited to be part of this panel to learn more about Joanne's latest study on women in philanthropy in Canada, and then hear from Lindsay to see how this research really plays in to practice on the front line. So Susan, thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jeannie. One of the things we see ourselves as a university-based program and research activity is to try to bridge some of the academic research with practice and with policy. We also recognize that in Canada, we've been heavily dependent on US research, and that Canadian philanthropy may align in some ways, but it may be distinctive in other ways. So, Joanne, you have now led the only two studies of women in philanthropy in Canada, and we're curious to know how the findings may be in line with, or may have some surprises from what Jeannie's just described.
Well, thank you, Susan, and a pleasure to be here talking about philanthropy and, of course, women and philanthropy. I think I'm just going to back up and tell you why we even started to do this research back in 2014, and what has happened since then, and why we felt it was really important to do not an update, but a brand new report in 2023. So way back, we realized as a financial institution, and I will say this isn't TD alone, it was a number of financial institutions, that we were not doing a good job catering to our women investors. And we actually hired Boston Consulting to do focus groups with women investors. And, the conclusion was that, women felt that women felt that investing was about the same as buying a car in terms of the experience, which wasn't a very good positive experience. But we knew we were not doing a good job simply because we know life expectancy of women is greater than men, and after the man died, within a year, all of the business, the investment business and everything would leave TD. It would leave the bank. So our advisors, who are the lead relationship managers, were not doing a good job cultivating a relationship with women. So we started to focus on that, and we learned women, again, crave different experiences when it comes to investing. They actually do a lot more due diligence than men. It takes longer for an advisor to sign up a woman client than it does. They ask a lot of questions. They're much more detail oriented. And so, and we've worked with our advisors, and of course, women like to get together. They like to attend events. They like to connect with other women, and we've been incorporating that in terms of our practice at TD. So in 2014, we said, okay, we know that women make investment decisions differently than men. We suspected that they made philanthropic decisions differently than men, but nobody in Canada had ever studied it. And so we took on the project with an outside firm at the time called Investor Economics. And they did quantitative research as well as qualitative research. We actually did focus groups in 6 major cities in Canada with women philanthropists. And we jumped on planes and sat in boardrooms with these women. And we had some really, really great conversations that came out. And of course, similar to the US, women relationships with organizations was extremely important. And we learned a lot from that report. But why we felt we needed to do another one, first of all, one of the factors that's really important today that was not on our radar in 2014 is diversity and inclusion. So when we actually did focus groups with women philanthropists, we just said, just get women in a boardroom that give, and we'll have a great conversation with them, which we did. But at the end of the day, when we look at who participated in the focus groups back in 2014, it was a lot of white women of a certain age. That were kind of the traditional philanthropists, gave us some really, really great insight. And, really what we wanted to do was do a brand new report. We wanted to make sure there was a diversity and inclusion lens on who we were talking to. Now, one of the silver linings of COVID is, as you know, we don't have to jump on planes and go visit people every time we want to talk to them. So rather than hosting in-person focus groups, the interviews with women for this report were done virtually. And one of the downsides of our 2014 report, as I said, we did focus groups in 6 major cities. We missed Atlantic Canada and we missed Quebec. We just didn't get there. And so because the interviews were done virtually, we made sure we had really good geographic representation. I mean, we had Halifax, we had Fredericton, we had Montreal, we right across the country. We did not miss any particular areas. But we didn't just want to talk to women who give. We wanted to put that diversity lens. And so we made sure that we were talking to women that give to LGBTQ organizations, that give to Indigenous, that give to Black-led organizations, to the arts and healthcare, and some of the traditional not-for-profit organizations also. But we wanted to make sure that we really had a broad, spectrum of women that give to different types of organizations that are different, as I said, different geographic locations, as well as women of different ages. We also had a specific category for women entrepreneurs. We know that entrepreneurs are really, really growing in terms of their impact. Women are playing a really large role in entrepreneurship. And we also know from previous research that we know that, well, in Canada, 2/3 of our high net worth clients are self-made, which means they have not inherited the money. And we know that people that are self-made, such as successful entrepreneurs, give differently than women who inherit money. Women who inherit money can still be very generous, but they also view their role as a steward or custodian of those assets to pass on to the next generation. When you've made that money yourself, you have established a business and you have built that business, that is your money to do good with, or do whatever you want with. And so we're seeing some really, really interesting, really interesting philanthropy with women, what we're calling as social entrepreneurs. So in Canada, regardless of who makes the donation, either spouse can claim it on their tax return with Canada Revenue Agency. So we don't really know who's behind the decision-making of the donations, but that's the data that we have. And so we know if we look at donations claimed by women on their tax returns, they increased, there's an increase from 1.5 billion in 2011 to 4.3 billion in 2021. And that's going to be projected to almost be 6 billion by 2030. So more and more women are claiming donations on tax returns simply because they're growing in income. And, as we heard from Jeannie, we know women do inherit twice. They inherit, from a parent, and then often again from a spouse. So women are growing in wealth. We still have work to do in Canada to close the income gap, but women are definitely inheriting money and playing a much greater role. We talked about the rise in social entrepreneurs. And the name of our study, as Susan mentioned, is Trust and Transformation, Canadian Women and Philanthropy. So one of the main themes that came out in our research with women is the importance of trust. And they need to trust the organization they're giving to. They need to trust the people that tell them about a particular organization. And of course, they want to connect. They want to connect with the organization. Many women, as a way to gain that trust or get to know the organization, are going to volunteer first. And we've actually had women who start doing their due diligence and they find something wrong, or that the organization could really improve on to do better. And they don't just walk away. They'll actually roll up their sleeves and jump in and start volunteering in order to participate, to help address those issues. And as women are growing and gaining wealth, they're also choosing vehicles such as donor-advised funds and foundations. So as Susan mentioned, TD launched the first donor-advised fund in Canada to be launched by a financial institution, which is the Private Giving Foundation, in October of 2004. So we saw the success of Fidelity and Vanguard and Morgan Stanley and all of the donor-advised funds in the 90s that started to launch in the US. We saw the opportunity. I kept hearing that at conferences that they would come to Canada because we typically copy the US. You guys always have lots of great ideas. And so in 2003, I brought the proposal to TD to launch the first donor-advised fund program in Canada. And it has been really, I mean, it has taken off everywhere. In fact, when I was building the Private Giving Foundation, our marketing department told me that it would be a matter of time before others copied us. And if they didn't, I should be worried as to whether there was a market in Canada for this. So I'm very pleased to say that there are lots of donor advised funds with financial institutions, with boutique investment counseling firms. Of course, they've always been with community foundations. And that's a really great thing. I don't look at it as competition for TD, because the more people that are talking about philanthropy, the better it is, and the net is going to get wider. Women, similar to the US, did not find that tax was the #1 motivator, even though we have very generous tax incentives when it comes to charitable giving in Canada. So even though they are not coming forward and saying that tax is the #1 motivator, as philanthropic advisors at TD, we are educating constantly on the most tax efficient ways to make a charitable gift. And why are we doing that if they say it's not important to them? We're doing it simply because if you can give in the most tax efficient manner, such as donating publicly traded securities, you can actually have a greater impact, and you can give more. Women do give to support women, and I've certainly learned from all of my years with the Canadian Women's Foundation and other organizations that are supporting women, that when you help a woman, there's a ripple effect. So that women will actually go and give back to their family and give back to their community. So it's a very, very strong investment to support women. One thing that came out in the study that showed we have some room for improvement, which I will agree, is that women would like their financial advisors to actually become more active in giving them philanthropic advice. Now, I spend a lot of my time at TD working with financial advisors so that they are comfortable having the conversation with their clients and encourage it as part of their financial and estate plans. In fact, at TD, we have 4 pillars that we address with our high net worth clients. They are build net worth, protect what matters, implement tax efficient strategies, and the 4th pillar is leave a legacy. And for many of our clients, that legacy is a charitable legacy. So in the perfect world, I would love our financial advisors to be very proactively having conversations. We're getting there, one advisor at a time. And, I actually spoke on Business News Network Money Talk last week on philanthropic planning strategies for year end. And it was just a 7-minute show. And one of our clients in Montreal actually emailed his investment advisor and said, I heard Joanne Ryan speak about charitable giving and donor advised funds. I'd like to learn more. And then this particular advisor had to go into panic mode, realizing he didn't know anything about it. It's not the way we like to be involved and brought into conversations. We want, and many of our advisors are proactively having discussions with clients. Many of our advisors are volunteers themselves, they're board members, they're donors, and they perhaps are more comfortable having those conversations. But that is a battle, and it did come out in the report with women that we continue to work, as I said, and if it's one advisor at a time, until we get to the point where all of our advisors are having these conversations with clients. And women give because they've been impacted, or family members or friends of theirs have been impacted. Women want to give back to the community. Women care, and that's been extremely evident this past year with the crises that we've had. And it seems like we've had a bit more than our fair share, whether it's the situation in Ukraine, currently the situation in the Middle East is, our women donors are completely engaged and worried, and being able to do something from a philanthropic standpoint isn't going to solve the war in the Middle East, but it's going to help them sleep a little bit better, knowing that they are contributing and doing something. And I think everything is very positive for women. Women want to be involved, they want to engage, and if charities, I hope, as a result of this report, will continue to look at what activities they can do to engage women as donors who do crave a different relationship and a different experience than men. And it's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of how you cultivate donors to give women want a unique experience. And I think that's great news for the future.
Thank you, Joanne. We look forward to reading the report. It's so important to have, and so valuable to have that more systematic evidence to support what we're hearing anecdotally. Lindsay, you've been focused on social change, on working in a way that may be beyond the sort of traditional, more trust-based. And we know you have a whole network of younger women who are also engaged in philanthropy in more strategic ways. So we look forward to hearing, what you've built, what you see others in your network as you watch women do really audacious things in their philanthropy.
Thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm really thankful to be here, and thank you for the invitation alongside these very wonderful women on this panel on what is one of my most favorite topics. Setting up Happy Roots Foundation really has been one of the most meaningful and rewarding adventures in my personal and professional life so far. So yeah, I'm happy to be here to share with you how we approach our work and in the context of this broader discussion on women in philanthropy. So very briefly, but first I do want to say that when I say we in all of this discussion with respect to our operations other than board governance, I'm referring to myself and our executive director, Monique Moreau. We are two women working together as the right and left arm of this organization. And really all of the ideas that we've implemented at Happy Roots are born out of our ongoing discussions, our brainstorming sessions, and idea testing between us. So as the briefest of backgrounds, Happy Roots, as Susan mentioned, is a private charitable foundation. My husband, Mark, and I set it up at the end of 2019. I had a family law practice at that time that I was open to taking a break from. And so I called Monique, who also happened to be my best friend from law school, and convinced her to join me in building this new organization from the ground up. So one of the beautiful things I think about joining a new space, and in our case, it was the private foundation world, is that you have the ability to do things in new or different ways, largely because you're not constrained by traditions. And that has certainly been our case since we're a brand new organization and the first generation in mine and Mark's family of doing this type of thing. So what I'd like to do today, I think, is share with you sort of 4 principles that we use to guide our work at Happy Roots. They're by no means totally unique to us, but through our work, we have come to realize that they represent maybe a departure from more traditional or historical forms of private foundation grant making. And I'm quite thrilled to hear that much of what I say dovetails a bit with what Jeannie and Joanne said, which I promise was not cooked up in advance. It is a natural flow. So what I'll do is run through them and then come back and talk about each in a little more detail. The first is that Happy Roots is a place-based or community-based funder. So that means that all of our grants are made to organizations in the Ottawa area. Our grants focus on one pressing social issue that we've identified. So in our case, that's infant and early childhood mental health. And we approach this issue as best we can from a systems change lens. Third, we've talked about trust already today on this panel, and we spend a lot of time at Happy Roots building relationships with our grant recipients that are founded on trust and respect for their time and their expertise in the work that they do. And lastly, Happy Roots Foundation is a limited life foundation. So that means that we will spend down our endowment over a total period of 10 years. So we will wrap up the foundation's work by 2030. So we decided very early on to focus the foundation's efforts in the Ottawa region exclusively. By no means, of course, not because it's the only deserving region, but because we wanted to focus our work on relationship building primarily and to make a positive impact in our community. Having said that, I should say, though, that because we also are approaching our work with a view to systems change in infant mental health care, many of the projects we fund in Ottawa are early stage and with a view to collecting research or validating models that could be used in communities across the country. So I so desperately want to give you a deep dive on a project that we're working with our Children's Hospital in Ottawa. But for the sake of time, I'll just highlight that that is a phase 1 3-year project that in its first 2 years in their infant mental health clinic has served over 100 families in Ottawa with children under 6 years old. So a real impact in our community. But the team is also, as they're working, collecting research and evidence to support a model of mental health care for our youngest and most vulnerable children that can be replicated in other places. So this sort of sets me up directly to talk about our decision to focus the foundation's work in one particular substantive area. This again was driven primarily by a desire to have a meaningful and sustained impact in one particular area in our community. We chose children's mental health initially because it was an area close to our hearts, but quickly realized that that in and of itself is a vast area. So truthfully, Monique and I used much of 2020 to read, research, meet with local organizations working in the space to see if we could identify where the biggest gaps were in children's mental health. And of course, when I say that, I acknowledge that there are gaps everywhere in children's mental health. But could we find a spot where they were really prevalent? And this is how we landed on infant and early childhood mental health, an age group of kids who have arguably received the least amount of attention in the mental health care system, and yet for whom supportive programming and interventions can have the greatest health impact, both personally for them and their families, and also for society at large over the long term. In the course of our research, we came across the idea of systems change and began to contemplate, okay, is there anything that Happy Roots can do, not only to fund programming per se, but also to contribute in shifting the big systemic pieces of young children's mental health care to contribute to creating a new system that acknowledges their needs and works better for them and their families. So I'm by no means suggesting that our little foundation that could was going to systems change the mental health care system, but we try and apply that lens when we are working with organizations in the city to look at new projects or early stage projects to see whether they might, whether supporting them might also contribute to a much longer term vision for kids and mental health care. So with that in mind, we did engage in a theory of change process in 2022 that helped us to define our work with this goal in mind. And also I could deep dive on that, but I'll just say that developing that theory of change was very hard work, but has been hugely influential because it acts as the foundation's roadmap for our decision making. It gives us 3 buckets of work areas, and we are able to be transparent about that by putting it on our website and sharing it with any organizations that we begin discussions with, and also helps us in our decision making because we always end up going back to it. The third principle that I mentioned earlier is our focus on trust-based relationship building. That fits third in the flow of what I'm talking about, but I don't want to give the impression that it ranks there in importance because, in fact, Monique and I would say this is the cornerstone of what we do at the foundation. I'm going to share a quote with you because we love the way that the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project has framed this when we talk about trust-based relationships, and they say it better than I do. So what we have embraced is this understanding. So I'm quoting, we envision a world where relationships are built on vulnerability, transparency, and humility, where community and nonprofit leaders are valued, supported, and trusted, and where funders bring an awareness of power and equity to their grant making. So what does this mean in practice for us at Happy Roots? We've implemented it in a few ways. Firstly, we don't have really a formal application. We spend time getting to know organizations in the community whose work fits with our mission and within our theory of change roadmap. And we always start with a rough sketch of what a project proposal might look like. So we never want an organization to fancy for us or that's fully fleshed out. It's really more of an ongoing discussion. I would say almost all of the projects we've funded have started as drafts and have evolved during ongoing discussion and collaboration between us and the organization that we're working with. Most of our grants are multi-year, so meaning that the project can roll out with certainty. So the organization knows that there's funding for at least some multi-year period of time. We're new in the game, so our first ones have been 3 years, and it's worked really well, and we're open to exploring some longer ones as well. We don't have rigorous reporting requirements. We don't want to take away time from our partners from what they're actually doing in terms of delivering services. And we don't want to receive anything that we'll read and put on a shelf. It's really more of a dynamic process for us. And when I say all of that, of course, I'm not suggesting that we don't care about the structure of the project or what's going on. It's the opposite. We're actually in contact in a low-key way throughout the life cycle of the grant. And we're not calling every week being annoying, but at 3-4 times a year, we have check-ins and connect. And when we do that, of course, we appreciate an overview summary. We love to hear about the successes, the challenges, what's working, what's not working. And I'll just highlight that for a minute because in terms of feedback from our partners, we've received really positive feedback from them about the fact that we want to hear about challenges and setbacks through the life of a project. We fully appreciate that a proposal at the beginning of a project is just that. Our grant recipients can't predict the future. They don't necessarily know what's going to happen over the 3 years of a grant life cycle. So when something needs to be adjusted, we meet and we do it. And we've done that a couple of times with various projects mid-grant. And then lastly, I'll say we have a really deep appreciation for the work that our grant recipients are doing. Partly because we just do, and also partly because we really know them, both in their work and as people. And I think that allows us, certainly, and I hope them, to have a lot more freedom to be creative and to try new ideas and to propose new ideas, either mid-grant or as a follow-up. And then lastly, I'll just speak very briefly about our final sort of principle or guidepost, which is that Happy Roots is a limited life foundation. So although CRA rules require private foundations to spend a minimum % per year, that's without a time horizon. But Happy Roots has decided to spend down its endowment over a total period of 10 years. So our grant making effectively began in 2020, and we've decided that we will spend that down so that it comes to an end in 2030. We think there's many wonderful benefits to private foundations having a long time horizon, maybe to plan, implement a long-term giving strategy, maybe tackle an issue in a sustained way that governments may be unable to do because of shifting winds of politics. But we at our foundation also acknowledge that we received the tax benefits on creation in 2019. and the foundation continues to benefit from tax-free growth. And so on this basis, we've really embraced the idea that we should think about using today's charitable money for today's problems. We've found that actually really energizing and quite liberating in terms of planning and engaging and being transparent about what we can and can't do and how long we'll be around. And that has really been the impetus for us in setting this sunset for the foundation's work. So I'll leave it there with the eye on time. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share. And I'm looking forward to our discussion and questions.
Thanks, Lindsay. You've given us a lot to think about, and you really approach philanthropy in a very mindful and strategic way. I remember those conversations we had when you were developing the strategy. If we think about women's philanthropy across the spectrum, Lindsay's created a particular kind of vehicle for philanthropy through a foundation, but whether it's through donor advised funds or direct giving to charity, some of the thinking that Lindsay has laid out, do you see that, Jeannie and Joanne, in the research that you've done, that women might be thinking more in the short term than legacy, that you've already indicated they're more trust-based, but how does what Lindsay's described resonate with what you're seeing in your work on philanthropy?
So
I can
I'll just
share-
start.
oh, go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Joanne.
Okay. So just quickly, when we launched the private giving foundation, the disbursement quota rules were such that the capital had to be kind of locked up for a minimum of a 10-year period. And thankfully, those rules no longer apply. So I'll just comment on the 10-year horizon for the foundation, because as you know, traditional endowments were in perpetuity or forever. And I would say that the majority of people that we talk to when it comes to their donor advised fund, they do not want it to go on in perpetuity. Forever is just way too long for some people. They also want to have the ability to distribute capital from time to time. If they, we have the disbursement quota requirement to pay out a minimum of 5%, but they want to have the ability that if a really interesting project comes up that is going to fund research and something that they have determined is very important to their family, that they can take, whether it's 500,000 or a chunk of capital out of their donor advised fund and apply it to that project. So, I mean, I really applaud Lindsay for that. The shorter time horizon, I think you can have a much greater impact with your philanthropy than the traditional donor advised fund. And the only other thing that really struck a chord with me, which I thought was wonderful, only because I just recently saw Dan Pallotta's movie, the private screening of Uncharitable. And, he did sympathize with charities who had so much pressure to produce reports about all the wonderful things that they did. And the reality, of course, is that everybody's human and we make mistakes. We make mistakes at TD, we make mistakes. And the fact that you're so open to having the charity admit that they are having challenges and talk about them, and you're not just going to pull your funding because everything isn't completely rosy. So I really applaud that. I think it's so important. I think women do have more compassion and empathy, that they aren't insisting that every report from a project they funded checks all the boxes and everything has just worked out beautifully, because that's just not how life is. So congratulations.
I would just add, again, what Joanne, to amplify what Joanne shared, with regards to what the research shows, is that women tend to be all in. And so they're very open to all the tools that kind of show up in the toolbox to express and lean into their generosity. So whether it's impact investing, whether it's DAPs, whether it's crowdfunding, whether it's the research around trust-based philanthropy and the feminist approach to philanthropy and giving, they're eager, as Lindsay has already shared with us, in learning and doing. and kind of understanding how it works for them, how to be more strategic, how to be more intentional. I think where women get caught up in their giving is they don't want to do it wrong, and so they spend that extra time. And Joanne shared that with us in terms of the findings from the report, that women take a little bit longer, and they want to figure out how to be most impactful, which is why Lindsay and Happy Roots has deliberately chosen to focus on a single area, so that they can not only will help guide their giving and their strategy, but they'll be able to express and share impact on that in a different way, because the needs, even when you hone in on a specific area, as Lindsay found, the needs are diverse and large. And so really figuring that out. And so I think everything that Lindsay shared is a reflection of what we've seen in the research, in particular that study that I lifted up in my remarks around women of high net wealth and how they give in all those different ways, that real holistic approach to giving. So yeah, excited to see this happening, and I'm bummed that I didn't bring up trust in my remarks. Because Joanne and Lindsay both brought it up, but I usually include that in my T's. So time, talent, treasure. Those are our traditional T's. Testimony as advocacy, social networks as ties. But trust and transparency are two additional T's that really weave themselves into all the other T's, but are really, really important to how women approach giving.
There are no doubt a number of fundraisers and charity leaders in the audience. Do you see a difference in how women view having a legacy, whether it's by naming something or recognition, versus not being so recognized? Or is that a gender difference? Is that an age difference, or is there any difference at all?
We've seen it in the research as a gender difference. In particular, so much of our research around women as donors has shown that they tend to give anonymously, but that has started to change. But I don't think it's because there's a motivation with regards to public recognition. I think the motivation is the use of and an understanding of philanthropy as agency, and the opportunity to use philanthropy as voice. Again, the whole all-in approach to giving. And so we're now seeing high-profile donors like Mackenzie Scott, French Gates, and Priscilla Chan, and Kwanzaa Jones, who are really understanding and leaning into the ways that I've already shared women prefer to give. Really seeing a voice as a way to approach giving collectively, so encouraging others to give. So they're okay with talking about their giving, because the motivation is to inspire others to join them and give with them, but also to do as what Lindsay is doing with Happy Roots, shine a spotlight on an issue that is really important, and that could require more philanthropy to address the issue. And what we've seen in particular around giving circles is that women have come together to pull their resources, so that their, let's say, $1,000 gift becomes a $10,000 impact. But they're also learning about the issue. And so what's happened now is that we've got a lot of giving circles who are now doing public policy work, because they understand that just as important is where all of this is happening on upstream. So they're organizing themselves to testify in state houses, and pull together, again, as Susan, as you've shared, how important it is to be engaged in the policy side of things. So yes, I think gender, but then I also think that there is a generational piece to this. with regards to those differences. But women for sure, it's not, they aren't motivated by public recognition, and but they are understanding it in a different way.
Joanne, are you seeing that, Lindsay, in your circles?
I would say the women that I'm dealing with mostly do not want the public recognition, and it's only in certain circumstances where the charity has asked them, and I've tried to explain to them that it's not to brag about what you're doing, it's to set an example and encourage others to come forward. But most women do not want their name on a building and or in lights in any way. They just want to quietly connect with others and do some good work.
Yeah, from a practical perspective, from my perspective, I would say exactly the same thing. And many women that I know who do give also are not doing it for that reason, and in fact might be a little bit turned away if they have to share, like there's a not it can be a deterrent to feel like there's going to be a spotlight. But I started out very shy about it and have become convinced by many organizations that there is a real advocacy role to be played in sharing that what you're doing, that it doesn't have to be, the recognition doesn't have to be about recognizing you, but rather shining a light on an issue or sharing some really important work that's happening in your community. And I think that's really compelling and does, as Joanne and Jeannie said, really convince a lot of women to share. We didn't name our foundation after ourselves, in part because I really didn't want it to be our names. We wanted it to be about the issue. So I think that really dovetails with what Jeannie and Joanne know from the research.
Question about longer term trends and some of the consequences. If women and men are giving differently to different causes, not just to women and girls, but there may be other causes, are we seeing a bifurcation of this is sort of the kinds of things that women will support, this the kinds of things that men support, and there's less middle ground? So what can you tell us about some of that overall pattern in terms of destinations of giving?
So until recently, and I'm looking forward to seeing some updated information around this, the only subsector where single women weren't giving more than single men was to sports and recreation. But that actually is, I think there's a shift in this. There's actually, here in the United States, there are a lot of, in particular, athletic departments connected to higher ed that are starting women's excellence and women's philanthropy circles, because they're seeing women really start to step up in the recreation and sports area. So one, we know that women are giving more to all of these, all of the different subsectors that one can give to in philanthropy. What I'll say is, what we know about women's philanthropy programs that adjust and consider what the research shows about how women prefer to give, and that they're meeting women where they are and thinking through and shifting, as I like to call it, disrupting what we consider fundraising best practices, which were built for men in the 1960s, built for white cisgender men, really. What we found, though, is as these programs shift and start to understand and start to change, not only do they bring more women to the table and bring more women donors in, these tactics and techniques also work for men. So this bifurcation, I'm gonna shift your question a little bit, Susan, in terms of the bifurcation. I think once as fundraisers we start to really consider and invite more people to the table, then we're going to bring more dollars in. And so a lot of what the research shows about how women prefer to give, we see in the research that my sister institute, the Mays Institute on diverse philanthropy, for donors of color and other marginalized communities, it works. So understanding and being more attuned to the intersection of how our identities shape our giving, not only invites more women to the table, but it does invite, it works for men, and it works for donors of color, and it works for other donors from other marginalized communities.
Sounds like there's the basis of a good research project there to better understand some of those other patterns. The question I asked also builds from a question from the audience, is that are women's support more readily shaped, their decisions motivated by events such as Black Lives Matter or the Me Too movement? Is that and it could be international causes. Are women, do you see women as being more responsive to public events or public movements?
Yeah, absolutely.
Joanne,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
So we've had so many of those events recently, as I was mentioning, Ukraine or the Middle East, but even climate change and wildfires that we've had in Canada. But definitely women are responding. And with COVID, we saw a lot of inequalities come to light. They weren't necessarily new, but again, I'm always looking for silver lining with the pandemic, but it actually, we had time on our hands, and issues such as food insecurity and some of the gaps in terms of, income disparity really came to light. I mean, people didn't, we were all stuck in lockdown, and, people didn't have proper Wi-Fi to connect on a Zoom call. Seniors were isolated. People, young children couldn't even participate in their school because they didn't have basic Wi-Fi. And, a lot of those issues were there before. But what happened with COVID, as we were in lockdown, they came to light, and a lot of the wealthier people were maybe even bored. They weren't jet setting all over the world, and they were actually learning about some of these issues that were not new, but became very evident. But I would say women will respond. They will respond to events that happen, like the ones that we've talked about. Certainly, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, but even some of the LGBTQ countries that make it very unsafe for people to live there. Women will respond very quickly with a lot of empathy to support those issues. So they will do the long-term strategic plan around their giving, which we encourage them to do. But when something happens out of the blue, and they actually have the ability to do something about it, they will act.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. I'll just say that from the research we've done, we also link it to empathy. And so in particular, when the wife is making all the giving decisions in a household for a couple, they are more likely to be motivated to give by spontaneously responding to a need. So that empathy is really, really helping drive that giving. And so for all of those events that we've had in the last 3 years, we've seen single women on lead in particular.
I'm happy to share an example. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, we were really had just begun engaging in our research and our due diligence and trying to plot what we would do for the foundation when the pandemic hit. And our first round of grant making was in May of 2020, and we made it in 3 buckets related to children's mental health. So food insecurity, safe homes, women's shelters in our community, and mental health supports. And I raised this because it was in tension with what we talked about earlier in terms of perhaps a gendered approach to this. We were really doing our research. We felt completely unready to make any grants. We were afraid we might be doing it wrong. We didn't want to get into the space yet because we didn't feel fully researched and ready. But to the point that we're talking about now, the emergency relief needed and what it felt like at the beginning of the pandemic pushed us into grant making before we thought we were ready.
Oh, you're on mute, Susan.
Sorry, hang on. Joanne, this might be something you have experience with. Has the way in which women treat their donor advised funds, we know there was a big outlay in response to COVID, but do you see women dispersing from the funds in shorter time periods, in reactive ways? What are the kind of differences in the use of donor advised funds?
Yeah, and initially we would have described the donor advised funds to be a long-term legacy of giving. And the benefit is it separates the tax receipt from the granting to charity. It's not always tax motivated, but if you are selling a business or you have a taxable event and you can get that tax receipt in a particular year, and we describe them as donate now, decide later, it's very helpful. But I would say definitely, I mean, throughout COVID and prior to COVID, we had specific dates of the year that our grants went out, and they were 4 times a year, and that just worked out, that worked just fine. And then COVID hit, and we were getting, from women, very, very strong, send this money, whether it was to a food bank or to provide, shelter, or, even just whatever it was needed. Charities were in a desperate situation. If you just look at a shelter, suddenly, they needed to have proper social distancing between, how people were staying at a shelter. They needed cleaning supplies. I mean, the needs just became huge. And so when we were getting requests from women to grant to charities, no, next quarter was way too far out. It was get this out, and we've actually changed our procedures with donor advised funds, that when you give us instructions today, we can get those funds out to your selected charities tomorrow. I mean, we're not going to sit on it for a month. We're not going to, we're going to make sure we do our due diligence. Their charitable status is still in good standing, but no, we get money out fast. We don't worry. I have to tell my TD leaders that this is not about building assets. Yes, it's nice to build a nice, assets under management, which is how people at the bank speak. And I'll let them know we have approximately 750 million, but the bigger number is the over 600 million that we have granted to charities since inception. And that's why we're doing this. And that's what this is all about. Very different, but I believe the bank kind of understands the whole purpose of the donor advised funds is to get money moving out, and we do it quickly. And in some of the emergencies that have been happening, there's often a matching program. And people love to get their donations matched. So it's like, if you get this out by this date, it's going to be matched. And there's kind of, this whole anticipation and urgency to get the money out. So yeah, we're getting money out fast, and we're getting money out furious. We're not concerned. And some people will deplete their whole donor advised fund, and then they'll add to it. And that's okay too. We're very, very flexible in the approach.
I'm going to paraphrase a question from a participant in the audience, that charities often get assessed in terms of their effectiveness by financial metrics, in particular by overhead ratios and low administrative and low fundraising costs, which many of us might agree is not the best way to measure effectiveness. But do you see women using those metrics extensively? Do they tend to give higher or less regard to them than their male counterparts as donors?
I'm going to say less regard. And again, I just watched the Dan Pallotta movie. Men tend to be more focused on that, and certain men of a particular generation. Some absolutely believe nothing should be spent on salaries, and I've had many of those conversations. But Some of the women that I speak to, they really want to know what impact they're having. And I've even had, depending on the problem that they're trying to solve, and some are very complex, like human trafficking as an example. I mean, I actually had a woman say to me, I don't care if my donation can get one woman out of human trafficking, I will be happy if I can change one life. It's not a matter of how many, is it 100 or is it 200? It's really they want to feel good about the impact, but how they measure that impact, it's not, who is the lowest salaries or admin. It's are they changing people's lives? And if that's one person who's in a horrible situation, for some people that's good enough.
I agree. It's really about the trust. It goes back to trust again and the relationship that they're building. And so I think it's really important for fundraisers and nonprofit organizations to realize that women are probably less likely looking at the financials of an organization, but they are looking for the stories and the impact that you're sharing. And so even down to making sure that the thank you shares a bit of that impact. And I think donors like Mackenzie Scott are really making other donors rethink what is important in that reporting and strategy, as she's been doing all of these very, very large gifts on using trust-based principles. And letting those organizations know that the work that you're doing is important, and you are best positioned to understand how that work should get done. And so I think that's something that a lot of donors are going to start to think about more.
That leads naturally to my next question: is how do women learn how to do this? Lindsay, you talked about your choices in philanthropy were principle led, that you spent some time learning and thinking about what those core principles would be. How did you learn that? What did you turn to? What advice would you have for other women, whether they're establishing a foundation or whether they're giving it a more modest level, of how to think about their philanthropy in a way that is principled, it fits with a deep resonance of what they're.
I would say those ideas came from two different sources. One, I had the privilege of doing a master's degree in this area. And so through the course of that work, and frankly, of course, I learned some of it in the coursework, but frankly, most of it for me came from discussions with my classmates throughout the coursework. I'll be vulnerable and transparent to say that because I didn't have a background as being a donor and a foundation donor when I started this journey. I started the master's and the foundation at the same time. So it was in tandem. And I sort of thought, I've done a good thing. I created a foundation and I'm going to do some good work. And it was in courses with many of my colleagues who were nonprofit professionals working on the organizational side, sharing many ideas, frustrations, sometimes criticisms of donors and foundations and traditional ways of grant making. And I thought, well, there's two ways to receive that feedback. One is defensively and one is openly and curiously. And I'm at the very beginning of this journey. So I'm more curious than defensive, and I'd love to learn more. So I really took all of their feedback. So it was a master's program, but largely it was related to the conversations that I had with people who are already working in the sector. And Monique and I would joke because my courses were typically Tuesday, Wednesday, and on Thursday morning, I'd call her and be like, I just heard about this and we have got to change things around here. And then we would sort of work on something new. so there was that, and then we had a lot of conversations, I think openly, with nonprofits in Ottawa, in our community. Every time we did a round, we hoped that we were building enough of a relationship to get feedback from them about what was working and what was different. And sometimes they would share with us, oh, this, we haven't run into this very often, or thanks for this, no need for a 10-page fancy PowerPoint piece. And we would try to have the most honest feedback that we could with them, acknowledging that there is a power imbalance. But we have tried very hard to tell everybody that we work with, we are open to change. We're happy to hear it, even if it hurts, and please don't be afraid to tell us. So I would say it's like an iterative process, but largely stemming from collaborative work. So for anyone, kind of to the beginning of your question, looking to get into it, although of course I highly recommend the master's program, I wouldn't say that it's necessary. It's really about finding people who are working either in the organizations you're interested in, or other foundations. My phone is always, I'll always answer. So I'd be happy to do that, but to chat with other people who are working in it, to get new ideas, and to be open to them and curious about the criticisms, because we are all doing great work. It's wonderful to, like, charitable giving is an amazing thing. That doesn't mean that there's not room for doing things a bit differently and broadening the scope of it.
We always recommend what we call a vision, values, voice exercise. So it's a giving plan, and to be intentional about thinking about your philanthropy, especially as women, and incorporating all of the different ways that you give, not just dollars, to get a full picture of your philanthropy, of what your generosity looks like and shows up as in the world. And it's a document. It's as easy as when Lee started us off this morning with thinking about his own philanthropic autobiography and how he got here. But then matching that with an understanding of what are your values and what are the causes that you care about most, and how do those match up? And I think you'll find it interesting when you do that. A lot of people find that so much of their giving is transactional. It's because they have to support the annual fund at their kids' school. They're tithing at church. But when they really explore what their values and passions are, really finding a way to match what you want, how you want to show up in this world, with what you really care about. And so it's just taking the time, Susan, to be intentional about it,
and we do that Jeannie, with our clients.
That's what I was
putting together a philanthropic plan that reflects their
Absolutely.
values, so they can be less scattered, they can have greater impact. And then what families will say to us is that then it becomes easier to say no when a request comes in. It may be a really good cause, but not what you have determined is really important for you and your family. But even once you've decided that an issue is important to you, and I'm working with a mother and daughter, so 2 generations right now, and I'll just give an example, but they have identified gaps in investing in women's health as an area of interest for them. And you don't even want to understand the dollars that go into research in men's health compared to the small dollars that go into research in women's health. So, but they're still on a journey, and they're learning. But I'll just give an example where I'm actually going with them to an event next week. And it's we have a women's hospital, Women's College Hospital Foundation. And they're just at the very beginning with their donor advised fund. And I'm actually really looking forward to going to this event. It's not a gala. It's going to be like a dragon's den. And they have 3 research projects that the hospital is working on. And they're going to be doing their pitch. And if you donate $5,000, you get 1 vote. If you donate more, there's, depending, then you'll get 2 or 3 or 4 votes. And then literally at the end of the evening, one of these pitches, which is, they're all probably excellent projects is going to walk away with some really good research money. And I mean, they're going to learn a ton. They've committed. They're brand new. I said, just $5,000. And she said, we don't really know enough. We don't need to vote. And I said, no, like this is the whole point of it. But I think they'll get, the mother and daughter will get one vote, and they're going to learn a ton. Even from the pitches that don't win at the end of the evening, they may still want to support it. I think it's a brilliant idea to engage, in this case, the mother and daughter, an evening out to learn and actually cast your vote for, what you want to support.
And again, another example of how all of those three things that I talked about, the research, women give broadly, women give collectively, women give holistically, all in that one event, that one engagement event. Very powerful.
We're almost out of time, but we have two quick questions, which somebody may want to take up. Are women more likely to give to grassroots causes than national charities? And a second question is, what impact do you see the changing patterns of immigration and growing immigration from a wide diversity of countries having on women and how they give? I know that one's a fairly big question.
I'll take that one first and just be really quick. Immigrants are more generous than people that are born in Canada. They're very grateful to Canada that we took them in and allowed them to build a life. Many of them are very, very successful. And so as we're growing immigration and immigrants are building businesses and having all kinds of success, I see that boding very well for philanthropy. Many of them do want to give back to their country of origin. And I try to work with them to find a way to do it as tax efficiently as possible. So they're not just sending money to India, just to a school or to an orphanage. And I will try to work with them to do that again, so they can have greater impact. But I would say that as far as the future of philanthropy, immigrants, bode very well.
And I'll just attack the first question. We know that women give more and are more likely to give, whether it's a grassroots organization or if it's a large organization.
As we wrap up, I wonder, can each of you take a moment to perhaps give advice to other women? Jeannie, we'd love to know the impact that the Women's Philanthropy Institute has had on philanthropy, on how we understand philanthropy. But
yeah, I'll go first. I'll say stay curious and be curious. You can see how that's worked out for Lindsay and her journey. But lean into and feel confident about the way how you see and approach philanthropy. There is no right way. And so what I hope the research from the Women's Philanthropy Institute shows is that it resonates for you and it's relevant for you. And so it builds your confidence to know that that you too can be a philanthropist by understanding that you do embrace a more expanded definition of philanthropy, that you do enjoy talking about your giving and enjoy giving together and enjoy celebrating your giving together. And so how are organizations providing opportunities for you to give in that way? So often organizations are focused on individual strategies. How are they thinking about bringing you and other women together to support a goal or a cause? And then really understanding that what motivates you and how you approach giving in this holistic manner is joyful. And so leaning into that. So that's where I think the research from the Women's Philanthropy Institute has been most impactful. And what I hope is that it will continue to disrupt current philanthropic norms. And I hope that it will help women to step more fully into philanthropy as agency and an opportunity to live their values in significant ways.
Good advice. Lindsay, your thoughts?
Thanks, Susan. I would say that what I have learned as part of this journey is that there are many different chapters to life and career and knowledge. And when I was a much younger undergraduate student at Carleton, I thought I would become an expert in one area, and that would be my path. And over this, I realized that there is so much opportunity for learning at every stage. And I didn't know that 5 years ago, I would really have an in-depth knowledge of infant and early childhood mental health. But whatever issue that you are interested in from a giving and charitable perspective, you can deep dive on it and learn and contribute to the area. And tagging on to that and bringing up, sort of tagging on to what Jeannie said and what you mentioned earlier, Jeannie, about philanthropy being about more than just money. And I really would highlight that. In lots of ways, I think that the word philanthropy has been almost co-opted by big philanthropy, and it doesn't mean that. And in most cases, that's actually not what it is. It's time and it's expertise and it's advocacy and yes, money, but it can mean all those things. So whatever chapter or stage of your life you're in, there's many rewarding ways to engage.
Well said. Joanne, last word to you.
So I'll just, I mean, I echo what we've just heard, but I would basically say be proactive. If you don't have a philanthropic plan that reflects your values and causes that are important to you, work on getting a philanthropic plan together and talk to your financial advisors. They need to help you. They're part of your team. And, you know, if your financial advisor isn't having a conversation with you about how philanthropy fits in with your financial and estate plan, then you need to have that conversation with them and let them know that it's really important to you. And I would just say, enjoy the journey. It's the whole philanthropic journey of learning. You're never going to get to an end point because there's always more to learn. And you don't know what you don't know, but have fun and enjoy the philanthropic journey.
Wonderful. Thanks to the three of you. I think we've come away with some really valuable messages and learned about experiences and the value of research. And thanks to TD Bank Group for being a supporter partner in this series over so long. And you'll get the report, and I'm sure our panelists are open to more specific questions that we might not have had a chance to answer. So thanks to all of you, and good evening.